If I could just, before I go through my experience, if I could just give some context.
Absolutely, yes. Yep.
Just to, I have, just want to show you my arm. You'll see it's quite black and blue. Mm-hmm. Okay, so just to explain, I have a very high pain threshold, and most people with cerebral palsy and various physical disabilities would have a extremely high pain threshold. I can work in pain and discomfort, because I'm used to a certain level of pain, and people with cerebral palsy are also used to severe spasms. It's part and parcel of having cerebral palsy, and they're used to having to wait maybe half an hour during the night, waking up with that pain to get themselves back to sleep. So it's quite common with people with cerebral palsy, and obviously depending on the type of cerebral palsy that you have, it will impact on the individual differently. And people with cerebral palsy have different, just like all people with disabilities, have different managing and different coping skills, because they very much cater their managing and coping skills to their own specific circumstances. So and then the other context I want to give, obviously my experience is pre-convention. It's pre the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, but it was not pre the introduction of the disability duties, which came in January 2007.
Yeah. And
my experience very much relates partly to that as well. So just to give it a bit of context.
Okay, no, that's very helpful.
Well, on this would have been on a Saturday night. I'm not. Sorry, my name is Tony O'Reilly. I'm 46 years old. I would be accustomed, as I've said in the context of my experience, to getting spasms, and I'm also accustomed to reasonably high levels of pain on any given day, and I work with it. But on this particular occasion, at about 9:30 on a Saturday evening, I got what I thought was the usual pain, spasms, and pain in my leg, going up towards my back. The pain normally subsides after about an hour and a half. But the pain didn't subside. In fact, it got worse and kept on getting worse. I went to bed at around 10:30, 10:35 to try and just lie down or try and do something or move my leg, and it seemed to ease it slightly. So I lay down in the bed, and then at about 12:15, the spasms were so severe that I was in tears, and I was screaming and yelling. It's like a knife in your back and your legs all at the same time, and then somebody moving the knife while it's inside you, and I just couldn't. The pain just would not subside, and this went on for a period of a couple of hours, and I think I was in such a state that eventually I just crawled out into the hallway and rang an ambulance, and asked them to come to my address, give my address, and I don't know how long it took the ambulance, but because I was in bed, I had very little clothes on, so I was going to have to put clothes on anyway, so it was going to take time because I'd only use of one side of my body, and I could only move a certain way, otherwise the pain would stab into my body and cause it just to be more excruciating. But I managed to get a light clothing on, and managed to get to my front door, which is a big security door. Managed to get it open, and pushed it open, and the ambulance men arrived somewhere between 2 and 3. I know I arrived at Altnagelvin at around 3 a.m. and I explained to the ambulance men that I was going through a very severe spasm, and they asked me to get up, and and they would help me out in the ambulance. I explained that I had no movement whatsoever, that I'd never had this type of spasm before, and I was in excruciating pain, and could they carry me? And so they did. They asked me in the ambulance, how did I get to the front door? And I explained that I just crawled on my stomach to the front door, and that I hadn't actually walked or been up because I couldn't physically. I used one elbow. It can be done. I've done it several times since. And so then I arrived at Altnagelvin at approximately just before 3 a.m. And was taken in, where I was interviewed, or to be nice about it, I was interviewed by a nurse, and I was asked, had I taken any alcohol or taken any drugs, was I on drugs, etc. I explained to the nurse that I hadn't taken any alcohol, but as a general rule I don't drink, and I wasn't on any drugs. And then she asked me, yes, but what drugs have you taken and what alcohol have you been taking? So I explained that I had cerebral palsy, and I again explained that I had taken no drugs or alcohol, and I generally don't drink alcohol as a rule. So you have taken nothing? She proceeded to question me about my intake of drugs and alcohol. This is something I am used to, because I've been kicked out of a few pubs because I've been accused of being drunk, even though in the last occasion I was drinking water all night, because cerebral palsy sometimes comes across, especially if you're fatigued, that you're drunk. But I couldn't understand how this nurse thought I was drunk, since I was wheeled in a wheelchair, so I hadn't been walking, so she hadn't seen my body movement or anything else. But I said I give her my word. I insisted that I had taken no alcohol and no drugs, and that in fact I had been in bed in my own home when the spasms occurred, and that this is a common feature of cerebral palsy, but that I had never had these spasms before. They were so severe at this point, and also even at the house, that I actually thought for about an hour, maybe more, that I was going to die. I thought my goose was cooked. I literally thought that, because I wasn't even sure at that point that it was spasms. I thought this was something else, and that this was it. And she said, right, so you've taken no drugs or alcohol? No. And that was after about maybe 10 minutes getting across that I had taken no drugs or alcohol. But I knew for a fact that the nurse didn't believe me. I also knew that the person with her in white, they looked at me disbelievingly. I was rather dishevelled. I will accept that I was rather dishevelled, but I had been in bed. It wasn't as if I was out on a pub crawl. I had been in bed. Of course I'm going to be dishevelled, having been in bed during the night. But I had taken no drink at all on that particular day, and I generally don't drink anyway. And
so what happened next then?
I explained that I was in terrible pain, which should have been obvious, because when I was talking I was crying. And it takes a lot for me to cry in relation to physical pain. And then I was left on my own for a short period in the room where I had been interviewed. I actually, personally, I don't want to be negative, I personally viewed it as an interrogation. I didn't view it as an interview. I didn't feel any compassion or any empathy on the part of the medical people at that point. I felt I was being accused of something and been found guilty. What I was being found guilty of, I'm not quite sure. And then they came back and they said, right, we're taking you out into the waiting room. They came back and he said, look, we'll give you a painkiller for now, and you'll see the doctor in an hour or so, or something to that effect, or whenever we can. And she said, we're quite busy. And I said, no, I don't want a painkiller, because I don't know what's wrong with me, and I don't want anything to go into my system until I can figure out what's wrong. Just let me see a doctor, and and I'll be happy. So they said it'll be an hour or so. So they took me to the waiting room, and I thought they let me stay in the chair, but they put me into the straight back chairs in the waiting room. And if you've ever sat in the chair in the waiting room in the accident emergency, well, I can't, you probably haven't, because I had to make sure and not move, because any movement at all, if I move to the left, even slightly, the knife goes in again. So it's like you're being stabbed on a consistent basis. And throughout all of this, I was in tears. So I was interviewed in tears. I was interacting with the medical people, and I was in tears, and I was in agony, and several times I screamed, even at that point. And to which, fair enough, they said, calm down, and I was trying to be calm. I was trying to stop the pain. I was trying to whatever. But they left me out in the waiting area. That would have been about 3:20. I remember looking at at the clock, and for those 5 hours then until just after 8, I was just left sitting in the waiting area. Nobody came or went. There was about 4 or 5 people there. There was about one drunk man who kept on walking in and out. I recognise that accident and emergency is accident and emergency, and in hindsight maybe I shouldn't have been there, but I was in such a state.
Can I just, at 3:20 till about 8 o'clock, then nobody came even and just said, are you okay, or what time it might be you would be seeing? Was there any kind of interaction? Or
the nurse came out to ask me to keep quiet. Okay. Because the crying was annoying. It must have been annoying another patient or annoying somebody. It didn't seem to be annoying anybody in the waiting room, but the nurse came out to ask for me to keep quiet, so I kept quiet. What you do is you bite your bottom lip, and you hold your breath as long as you can, and then you breathe gently, and then you do it again, and you just keep doing that. Mm-hmm. So to some degree that occupied me, because I had to keep the exercises going to keep the pain away. Mm-hmm. It sort of occupied me to try and also I've been in hospital before. I've had major accidents. I've got the scar, so I know both the public rules of interacting with the hospital, but I also know the hidden rules. I know about the brownie point system, and I know how things really work. I have a lot of experience of being in a hospital. I've had operations, I've had emergency care, I've had last rites. So I know all of the rules about how to be and how to behave, and not to ask for too much, not to be, whingy or demanding, or because the nurses and doctors have other things to do. You're not the only patient there. So I know the circumstance. And then at about 8:20 or just after 8, a male nurse came out and took me in to a bed, but it was like a hospital, a bed you go to before you be put on a bed. I don't know the name of it. Like a trolley bed.
Yeah.
Huh? A theatre bed.
Yeah.
And that they have the curtains. Mm-hmm. And they put the curtains around, and then I was left there and I don't know how long I was there. I don't know the time frame for how long I was there. And but he asked me to get up onto the bed, and I said I can't. I am in extreme pain. I can't move. And he said, well, no, we're not looking at you to do any walk. We just want you to get up onto the bed. And I said, well, could you carry me onto the bed? No, get up yourself. No, I can't. If I could, I would. I literally can't. So eventually another guy came in and they put me onto the bed, and they said somebody would be in to see me shortly. And I lay on I think it was the right-hand side of the bed, and held on to the edge of the bed to make sure the body wouldn't move back and cause the stabbing pain either in the leg or in the back. But unfortunately, you have to breathe sometimes, and sometimes you have to take a big breath because you're going to go in for maybe 5 minutes where you're going to have very little breath. Mm-hmm. So I took a risk and breathed because I was having difficulty breathing, and I let out a yell, but it wasn't a big howling yell, because I managed to control it, because I know there must be other people around me, and I was very conscious of that. And one of the nurses shouted, shut up and stop that nonsense. And so I shut up and I stopped that nonsense. And to cut a long story short, and then eventually a male nurse came in. He was actually quite nice, quite kind. It was a different one, and I said, "Is there, I didn't want anything initially, but can you give me something for the pain? This is excruciating." And I said, I'll pay for it. I understand that resources are tight and money's not. If you could just give me something. I've been here for 5 hours. And he said, yes, somebody's come to see you now. We're going to get you some tea and toast. And they got me some tea and toast. A doctor came in and he spoke to a female nurse, from what I remember next. I must have been unconscious for a period, or I can't remember what happened after the male nurse went out.
Sure.
And then he said, they give me, I think, 2 painkillers, and said, you'll be fine in a couple of days, go home. So I rang my 2 people that I knew, and they lifted me out of the hospital, lifted me into the taxi, and took me home. And I think that my issue isn't that they didn't give me the painkillers, or they didn't necessarily give me the right treatment. They obviously gave me the tablets at the end and said, go home. My issue is that in my experience, there was a lack of compassion, a lack of understanding, that when you go to an accident emergency situation at 3 o'clock in the morning from your own bed in your own house, you're vulnerable. When you go into hospital, and when you go into any health establishment, even if you go to your GP and you're worried about something, if you're worried about a bruising or something, you're vulnerable. At your most weakest point, you're going into A&E and you think, and I did think, okay, I was wrong. I thought I was dying. And yes, I accept I was wrong. I'm still alive. I'm sitting here in front of you. But at the time, I actually thought I was going to die, and that it was curtains because the pain was so severe. And bar one male nurse, nobody showed any compassion, any understanding, and they never even asked me about my pain, where it was located. I know they're all convinced that I was on drugs, or I was drinking alcohol and I'd got a wee bit too drunk and maybe fallen. I'm convinced of that, but that is not the case. I had no drink that night, absolutely none, and I had no drugs, and I don't take drugs generally.
Can I ask you a couple of questions? No,
sure.
You'd said that, as far as you were concerned, when you came into the hospital, you felt that you didn't know what it was other than you were in excruciating pain and you thought you might be dying.
Yeah.
And you were sent away with the 2 painkillers. Were you sent away having been told what they thought the problem was, or were you were just sent away with the painkillers and that was it? Did you leave with any kind of sense of? Oh no,
sorry, I forgot that.
Or were you just simply sent away with the
no, the doctor did say it was just severe contractions of my muscle bone. It's just a more severe spasm than I would normally get. Yeah. And he said not to worry, and there's a couple of painkillers.
And have you ever been back to emergency department? I mean, that's 7 years ago.
Oh, you mean from the 5 attacks, similar ones since? No.
So it's 7 years since that happened to you.
Yes.
You've had spasms.
I've had severe spasms, very severe, right up to the neck, and I haven't gone back to any.
And is that because of the experience you had in 2007?
Yes.
Right. And when that happens again, what do you try and get treatment somewhere else? Do you simply suffer the pain and take painkillers yourself?
Well, the doctor, my own GP gave me what's called muscle relaxants. So it takes a half an hour, up to an hour, to settle them down. But I've had no severe spasms. Very severe spasms since I think May 2013. So but I didn't know that the spasms would get more severe than I'd normally had growing up. So I had no clue that was happening. Sorry.
And let me ask kind of a final question from me, which is, let's assume, hope it never happens, that something happens to you where you have to go to emergency department again, whatever it might be. Assume for a second I'm the powers that be. What would you be saying to me that you would feel you need in order to have a different experience from the experience you had in 2007?
For me, for me, and I think for people using accident emergency service generally, is talk to me, ask me at least where the pain is, ask me, ask me what they need to know, and when I say I have cerebral palsy, believe me, why would I lie?
Yes, sure.
I'm not lying. And I still have cerebral palsy today because I've had it since I was born. So if you say you have cerebral palsy, do your best to believe the patient. And if the patient gives guidance and says, oh, I'd like this, and maybe, the doctor knows best in the sense of, this is the treatment, that's fine. But listen to the patient. I mean, I've worked with organisations, you call them community groups, and in relation to the previous evidence, and worked with the North West Forum of People with Disabilities, and they've worked for the last 15 years with the Trust trying to develop user involvement framework. We got disabled people together to develop a user involvement framework with the health trusts and with the boards, and the framework has been established, which was established by disabled people themselves, but so far, the trust, the board, they haven't resourced it. And from the one-on-one experience, if you don't listen to the person and listen about their experience, you're going to get nowhere, because they do know what's wrong with them. At least let them tell you what they think is wrong with them. It might be wrong. It mightn't be entirely accurate. We're not qualified doctors, but we have the experience of living with our own conditions for a lifetime. And just to me, in this particular instance, there was no consideration of listening to the patient. In fact, the patient, I think, was deemed as a highly suspect, and they didn't believe his condition.
Okay, thank you. Marion, do you want to?
Tony, I have only one question. Could you tell me about your experience of using the complaint system in relation to your experience at any?
Sorry, in my experience of
using the complaint system.
Sorry. Yes, I forgot about that bit. Yes, I wrote a letter of complaint to the hospital. I rang up the hospital first and got the procedure, and I wrote to the hospital and gave my experience, and they wrote back to me, and again, the previous witness said, "We're very sorry that you've had a difficult experience. From what we know, they gave me a set of circumstances which related to another patient. Must have done, because it certainly had nothing to do with what my concerns were. Maybe it was a mix-up in the post. And then, of course, as I found out later, they always tell you they can't identify the relevant people involved in your case. And then I went to my local MP, because for me I thought it was a very cruel and very harrowing experience, because I went there expecting care and expecting a wee bit of sympathy. Maybe not everything would go right, but at least believe what I was saying. But the MP indicated that this was a dime a dozen, and this was common practice, and it was unlikely that I would get anywhere, even if I went to somebody like the Ombudsman or whatever. And he said, "You'll be putting yourself through a lot of grief, because the trust, the hospital or whatever, they'll just close ranks, and you're just one person out of how many?" And he said there'd be no value, I don't think, in pursuing it. He said, "I've had hundreds of complaints."
Thank you very much, Tony.
Oh, sorry, can I just say that, I don't know if I've already said this, when they outlined my circumstances, they outlined an entirely different set of circumstances. that didn't relate to me. They said that I asked for painkillers when I entered, when in fact I had refused because I wanted to see the doctor. I didn't know what was wrong with me. They said I kept on insisting. I didn't. I never spoke to anybody voluntarily until they spoke to me because I understood the rules. And when I showed it to my colleague who was with me on the Sunday after the experience, the Monday after the experience, and saw the letter I'd written and the reply, he actually said to me, "Who are they talking about? Because this isn't your experience at all." You know, so I genuinely think they've put me down as another patient and created a set of circumstances that, or not created, but a set of circumstances associated with them, and they couldn't identify the relevant people in my case. Sorry.
Thanks, thank you.
Paul.
Thanks, Tony, and thanks for your very thoughtful and very, for us, very instructive comments and story. And I don't have any questions for you, but I just wanted to thank you very much.
Okay.
Tony, thank you. You've been very clear, very articulate, but as we've said to everybody that's given evidence before us, is there anything you want to finally to say?
Yes. I've had a good relationship with many people within Altnagelvin, a very positive experience. I get physiotherapy at Altnagelvin, and I've received other services at Altnagelvin, and I have nothing but respect for the doctors and nurses who work in often very difficult and trying circumstances. And I'm giving you just this one experience that I had back, and I don't wish to undermine the nobility and the care of the profession. But I think a number of things need to happen at a structural level, hospital-wide, and generally within all services. And one of the things I think that would have been helpful in my case, had there been a well-established, for example, local patient involvement group within the hospital, had there been a strong relationship with the patient-client council, etc., where service users are actually on the patient-client council and are party to that experience. And I suppose the second thing, I would strongly, if there were going to be recommendations arising from your inquiry, I would strongly urge the inquiry to consider that all frontline staff, not just the nurses or the doctors, but all the frontline staff, from the person, from the cleaning specialist to the ambulance people, receive disability equality and awareness training, and indeed equality awareness training generally. I also think that obviously in 2007, in my experience, it predates the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and obviously predates Article 4.3, which states that disabled people should have a voice in all matters which affect them and their decisions, and that it's explicit and that disabled people in particular have a voice in how they're treated, regardless of their age, as per Article 7 and I think Article 2 of the Children's Convention. I also think that there's strong evidence that the disability equality duties, which is promoting positive attitudes towards disabled people, and the second one, which is promoting the participation of disabled people in public life. And this is critical because this is about service user involvement, and public life, as defined in the guidance, is very broad. It's about, for example, in this moment, I'm participating in public life because I'm giving my experience to you. So I'm exercising, you as a commissioner giving me the opportunity to participate in public life by giving you my experience. So if there's a stronger emphasis on that right across the board, particularly within the health sector area, and a better awareness of the need for a social human rights model, as opposed to, they've focused very much on the treatment, and that's their area of expertise, and that's good that they do that, and they do have that knowledge, and the medical model shouldn't just be dismissed because the medical model is important, but it should be about compassion. It shouldn't just be about treating the disease, if you will, or the condition, but compassion and learning to be one with the patient and understand the patient experience. A bit like, I suppose, Patch Adams and Robin Williams, if that's any help.
Okay, you've been incredibly clear and articulate.
Okay.
That's been great. And as I'd said to Jerry, who was in, the testimony is really, really important to us, that we hear from people who have on the front line of receiving services, and it's really important piece of the jigsaw to hear actually when things go wrong or could have gone better, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to look at issues that need remedying. So thank you very much for giving up your time this afternoon, Tony. That's been great. Thank you.
Thank you.